I was reading a book this week, about mission. And in it, the author points out that sometimes modern church services have been described as a Coldplay concert followed by a TED Talk. Have you ever been, perhaps not ours, perhaps not our service this week, but in more contemporary churches, it's most often, pop rock music to begin with, and then a TED Talk for 20 minutes, or actually more likely about 40 minutes in a modern. Have you heard that description? Coldplay concert followed by a TED Talk. And look, we do kind of follow that format. In a certain kind of light. Jason looks a bit like Chris Martin. I don't know why that was laughed at. And yes, now you're all sitting there looking at me giving what could be considered, if you turned the volume off and didn't listen to what I said, a TED Talk. And we are looking at what is the difference today between that kind of scenario and a church. What is the difference between a crowd and a congregation? Steph began this journey a few weeks ago, actually the second week of the series, where she pulled apart the question, why church? Why do we gather? By taking a look at Acts chapter 2, verse 42, specifically, which says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. So church exists for the purpose of teaching, fellowship, sharing, and prayer. Last week, Stuart reminded us of the core teachings of the apostles. And this week, we are talking about fellowship. And before I do, I have to, for anyone from Wollongong who may be watching or may hear of this later on, I hated the word fellowship. I have to admit. We would often propose and have events around the church, and we'd call it the fellowship this or the fellowship that. And in particular, a fellowship lunch. I hated the name, not because I don't like fellowship, not because I don't believe in fellowship, but because I don't think people really understand it. So today I have the opportunity with you diving into Hebrews chapter 10, and we're going to have a look at what exactly fellowship is. And as I said, it's not a concert crowd. It's a congregation. It's not a set of students. It's a community. It's a community in which all members' lives touch. I've been to a Coldplay concert. It's a lot of fun. And yeah, I do touch the person next to me because, the seats are packed in, but that's about the extent of it, right? And in the same thing in church, we don't just get together to hear someone preach on a Sunday, although I'm very glad you're here. We have connected lives. That's the aim. To eat together, pray together, hang out together, share together. And the key word for us today is a Greek word, which is funny, because when they translated it into English, they made it two words, one another. One another. Which is weird, right? Because it's a word that means together, but they made it two words. I just find that ironic. It means mutuality. So when you come to church, it's a place where you come not just to be taught or shepherded or counseled or anything, but it's a place where you come to teach one another, to counsel one another, to confess your sins to one another, to bear your burdens with one another. It's a mutuality, not just a crowd. I also want to address quickly verse 25. It says, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. I don't know if you went to church much post-COVID or if you tuned into a bunch of sermons post-COVID, but quite a lot of pastors, preachers and ministers would get up and say, everyone has to come back to church, and particularly on their live stream. Everyone has to come back to church. Look what Hebrews chapter 10 verse 25 says. Don't give up meeting together, right? Come back to church, come back to church, come back to church. And that's kind of cool, right? Yeah, do come back, it's good. But even if you do come back, and I know all of you have, but even if you come every Sunday morning, that's not what the text is saying. It's saying make sure you don't give up participating in this mutuality, in this fellowship. Don't give up meeting with your people. There is more to it than just turning up. To participate in true fellowship, in true mutuality, you have to show up and stand up. How many of you have seen the movie The Fellowship of the Ring, the first in the Lord of the Rings, or read the book? There's a few nods and a few hands. Good, because part of my preparation for today's sermon was to suffer through the movie for the 30-somethingth time. In the Fellowship of the Ring, the fellowship is formed where one by one the members of the fellowship step forward. Actually, they're already standing, but you know, right. But they step forward and they pledge to participate, to support the burden carrier until the burden is released, i.e. the ring is destroyed. Mutuality happens over conversation, over the sharing of burdens, the spurring and the supporting. One of the key ways we do this around here, and in course in all sorts of churches, is to encourage people to be part of a small group or smaller groups. On Sunday, you might have noticed, but all the seats face this way, which is nice. I like you all. But that's not fellowship, is it? Getting into a small group is important because in a small group, you sit in a circle or around a table or in some way facing one another. One of the reasons brass bands have been such a strong feature of Salvation Army expression is because they are places of deep fellowship where people sit around facing each other and harmonizing with each other, mostly. It's a deep fellowship to be part of a band. But as Tolkien also teaches us, a fellowship is not just a support group. It has a larger purpose involved, right? In the Fellowship of the Ring, the purpose is to support the ring bearer so that they would eliminate the major evil in the world. We too are a fellowship formed to eliminate evil wherever we find it in our world. But more than that, it's a personal world that we're talking about. The first few verses that we read there describe for us ourselves, our own lives. So we care about our world, for our planet, our country, our state and communities, all that sort of stuff. But fellowship is also about dealing with our own stuff, our own things and our own burdens, such as Frodo carried. C.S. Lewis writes, in Mere Christianity, Christ works on us in all sorts of ways, but above all, he works on us through each other. We join fellowship, find support, encouragement, fertilizer, and sometimes manure that we need to grow, mature, and thrive. So how do we do fellowship? Well, that's where we're at today. How do we do it? Let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds. Not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. And all the more as you see the day approaching. So from these verses we get three things. You'll be surprised, three things. Three things turns up fairly regularly in human history and conversation, don't they? We are talking about considering, we're going to talk about spurring, and we're going to talk about encouraging. These are all key practices for fellowship. So, considering. We are called to consider one another. If we are to help people become more loving, if we are to help them by spurring them on to do more good deeds, we must first stop and consider them. I think we run through that sentence. Considering one another, da-da-da-da-da-da. We focus on the spurring one another, we don't stop and consider. Considering is very important. I don't know how many of you have spent any time with a therapist or a counsellor, but often they take notes. Have you ever seen that? And it's because they don't want to forget what you said, but also they are drawing on all the knowledge and information that they know because they are thinking about you and what you say, and they are considering. They are stopping and considering, how can I help this person? How can I help this person become less anxious or less agitated? How can I help them to become less angry? How can I help them deal with disappointment? How can I help them to manage grief? How can I help this person become happier, more joyful, wiser, fuller, and freer? They are considering. And that's what a counselor does. And in a healthy fellowship, we want to do that for one another, to consider one another. Now, I don't mean that you all need to take out your phones over coffee and write down notes. Although, as someone who forgets names and connections and relationships and all that sort of stuff all the time, I probably should do that. But we need to make sure that we each have people around us that we know who are actively thinking about us, thinking about you, your happiness, thinking about how to help you get past the difficulties and embrace the joys of life. And my first question for this morning is, do you have people actively helping you carry life's burdens? Not just people who are nice and friendly, that's cool, but people who are actively out to support you, looking out for you, looking for ways to help you be more joyful. And then, of course, the flip side of that, the second question is, are you doing that for other people? Are you actively seeking to see them grow and thrive? Are you considering? That is the first key practice of a truly godly fellowship. The second key practice of a truly godly fellowship is spurring. Spurring. Now, the Greek word for this is great, but you could also translate it into another English word, and the other English word that fits really, really well is irritating. Hands up if you know churches or people who are irritating. There's not a lot of hands out there. Everyone's living a very happy and chilled out kind of life. Hands up if you're sitting next to... No. That's not what we mean. That's not the kind of irritating. The word is to sharply disagree, to sharply confront. See, when you enter into true fellowship, you give power to your mates to call you on your crap, to challenge you when you start thinking and saying stuff that isn't true, to give you your closest friends, you give your closest friends permission to stop you, to challenge you, to irritate you, to sharply confront you. You can't simply surround yourself in life with yes people. It's a very key lesson in leadership and governance, but it's also true on the very basic level of our first level relationships. People who simply agree with all our ideas and actions. Now, I know it's not easy to trust people, particularly if you've suffered so much in the past. It's not easy to listen to people when they call us on our stuff, but it is essential. In the Fellowship of the Ring, the character Boromir is a key example of this. Boromir and his people have suffered and fought against the evil for the rest of humanity for generations. He believes he deserves the power of the rings. He believes he can handle the power of the ring. He believes he can take the ring and use it to defeat the evil. And yet, the fellowship, the combined wisdom of wizards, elves, dwarves, humans, and hobbits have tried to irritate him and tell him otherwise. But he doesn't listen. And in his blindness, he tries to take the ring for himself. And it sets in chain a series of events, lack of attention, which in the end has him killed. Sorry, spoiler. You know what? We're so often the same. Because of our life circumstances, our struggles, and everything else, it means we have blind spots. We make assumptions about ourselves and the world around us that turns out to be false. And sometimes we need loving people, people we trust, people we see and we know consider us, to irritate us so that we don't end up doing something stupid that we'll regret. So a godly fellowship, being an incredibly considerate group of people, full of love and acceptance, should be a place where you can experiment with trusting people like this and have a go at listening to a little loving irritation now and then. There is a rule, though. Speaking the truth in love has a rule. And the rule is, don't irritate someone unless you have permission. Yeah? Unless you are in the kind of relationship where you have consent to irritate somebody else, unless you have that, keep it to yourself. That's the rule. Are we good? Because otherwise, if we break that rule, it starts to erode fellowship. So that's the second key. Third key, encouraging. A godly fellowship is encouraging. And let me just say, this is not just saying nice things about people. We used to do these exercises in youth group. I don't know whether you ever used to do it. You used to have to get little bits of paper and write nice things about people. That's nice. It's nice. No one ever wrote anything about me. No, they did. I think the leaders made them. You write nice things about people, and we had a letterbox. You had to put it in a letterbox. Nobody much knows what a letterbox is anymore, but think of it as a real-life email inbox. It's about... So the word cœur, C-O-U-R, is the word for heart in French, I think. So encore is to put heart into. Perhaps the way we can explore this a little bit is by understanding what it is to take heart out of. What is discouragement? Setbacks, suffering, hurts, mistakes, missteps, and failures. When you are discouraged, generally, the result is you don't want to keep doing it, whatever it is that you're discouraged by. Does that make sense? Let me say, all right, so when I was younger, I learnt piano. Well, as I said, my parents sent me to piano lessons. Let's just put it that way. And I struggled because whenever I told this finger to do something, this finger would do it as well. And I could never get my two hands to do different stuff. Don't know why. I can do it with a guitar, couldn't do it with a piano. And I would get so frustrated. And I would get to the point where I would think it is impossible. I became discouraged. I thought I was stupid. My fingers would never do what they were told them. I was hopeless, and I did not want to try and do it anymore. And eventually, with much persuasion, my parents let me not do it anymore. Anyone had an experience like that? Anyone here play piano? Or anyone start piano lessons? The writer of the Hebrews is not talking just about piano. The writer of the Hebrews talks about life. When we get discouraged in life, when we lose heart in life, when we suffer in life, when we make mistakes, when we fail, when we hurt, when we can come to a point where we think we're not worthy of this anymore. It is hopeless, and I just don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to hang out in life anymore. I don't mean just suicidal, like that's the end result of this thought process. But usually the first response is to step back out of life, to step back out of our relationships, to step away from meeting with people. The writer of the Hebrews says, don't stop meeting with people. Your people. That's what he means. Don't lose heart. Don't stop meeting with people. At the end of Lord of the Rings, Frodo, the burden carrier. The death of Boromir, kidnapping of two of his friends, the pain and suffering of the rest of the fellowship. He decides everyone is suffering because of him, because of his burden, his responsibility. He decides to try and separate himself from the rest of the fellowship. He thinks being with him is too hard, too dangerous. It's too unfair to everyone that should be with him. He loses heart. He starts rowing away. Up until this point, he's been protected by 8 very skilled people. Well, 3 of them very skilled, you know. And he thinks he's going to survive alone. He's going to be dead within a day. But the hero of the story, Samwise Gamgee, his mate, companion, charges after him, somewhat foolishly, and he refuses to let Frodo carry his burden alone. He refuses flat out. He reminds Frodo of his promise. He reminds Frodo that he considers him. He reminds him that he will be with him no matter what. And in the same way, by our presence, our persistence, and our patience, and sometimes our words, we put heart into people. We give them courage. We stand there and we say, no matter what you think, I am here and I am with you because you are worth it. You matter. You are loved. And together we will get it done. That's encouragement. It's the third key practice of the fellowship. So I want to encourage you to consider and pray for people, to, with permission, spur one another on, and to encourage one another. Just before these verses that I focused on, we're reminded that the Son of God did this for us. He saw us wandering away as a species, as a humanity. He saw us wandering away from God and the good things that God has for us. And he said, no, I'm not leaving you. You can try and walk away, but I'm going to come to you. And he did. He stepped out of heaven. He came and walked with us. And in case you haven't heard it yet, he did it for you. Because I'm pretty sure you're all part of humanity. He did it for you. You matter. You are loved. God himself wants to give you heart. So we're going to reflect on that for a minute. I don't know how that sits with you in fellowship, and I don't know how you feel about gathering together and considering people. I don't know how about you feel about whether or not you have heart right now. I don't know if you're facing hardship, challenges, or contests, or whether or not you're simply trying to work out your purpose and calling in life. But in all these things, God wants to walk with you, to be present and persistent and patient. We're going to sing a song about this fellowship that exists first and foremost between we who sing and the God who walks with us. And as we sing, I invite you to pray. Perhaps you are facing some sort of burden right now and you would like to come and to kneel and to pray, to make a bigger moment, I suppose, in some way. A place where hundreds of people have knelt and prayed over the wrestles and struggles of life, the burdens that they have to carry, the evils that they have to fight. Perhaps you would like to come and pray. But you'd like to pray where you are. You're most welcome to do that as well. But let's sing together. What a gift of grace is Jesus, my Redeemer. There is no more for heaven now to give. He's given it all. He's my joy, my righteousness and freedom, my steadfast love, my deep and boundless peace. Let's sing together.